Hi, everyone. It's Joan Ryan. I am the author of Intangibles. I think this looks backwards, though, when you hold it up.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't? Okay.
No.
To me, it looks backwards, so it doesn't on the, that's a good thing to know, right?
It doesn't look backwards to me.
Good. Okay. That doesn't mean it isn't backwards, but it doesn't look backwards to you.
True.
This is a book about team chemistry that I've been working on off and on for 10 years. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that. And I'm really proud of how it came back. It was eye-opening on a lot of ways, in a lot of ways. And so today, for the Pandemic Baseball Book Club, where all of us, you know, ink-stained wretches are trying to get our books on baseball out there so people can, you know, actually buy them. I have with me tonight the great Ray Ratto with the
No reason to go there.
With a resume too long for me to list, but Ray and I know each other since it gives away our advanced ages, which I don't care about at all. With now that I can't color my hair, the gray's all coming out. Since 1985, Ray, you were one of the first people I met when I moved out to San Francisco to take a job at the Examiner from the Orlando Sentinel. Now,
Yes,
sure,
and I apologize for my behavior ever since.
but I'm sure that was a big moment in your life.
Oh, no, yeah, we celebrate it every year. And since you're drinking, I'm drinking.
Yeah, cheers. Cheers. I think that's the only way to do this.
Oh, no, we cannot do this stuff sober. We can't.
No. As I told you, we couldn't do this until nighttime because I needed to get my heat on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look fabulous out of focus, if that helps.
Well, you know what? I did try that. Who told? Michelle Smith said her life was changed by putting on the make me look better or whatever, or make my appearance better click on Zoom. So you could try that, but I think what it does is just make you more fuzzy.
No. No, you're fine. I'm viewing the world fuzzy.
Oh.
Yeah.
How long have you been drinking? You just got off your radio show.
Yeah, since 1966. I was 12.
Thus, your success has been explained.
Yes. Being a raging alcoholic since preteen years is really the way to go. Kids, it's your ticket to ride.
So since I do want to address my book somewhat in case people who are watching this want to hear about it, or I might be able to sell a book or two. Ray, what do you think about team chemistry, and why are there the analytics guys? Most analytics guys have come over, you know, to the good side, but you know, to realize that both can exist together. You don't have to make a choice, but there are some out there that just dismiss it out of hand.
Yes, but that works the other way too, because there are a lot of people who are sort of the feel of baseball types who get to go to the park all the time and don't get to see the chemistry and don't get to see the intangibles. And I think because you have those two schools that don't get to merge because there's no sort of ready interaction that allows many people to sort of see both sides of the issue, that they turned it into what the internet makes very often is just sort of turf wars and fights.
Right.
And I think it's taken this long for analytics people and field people, that's what I call them, to accept the fact that there's no one way to enjoy baseball and that the smartest people enjoy it with both things in mind. But I think that takes a long time because people get entrenched in their positions and stay there.
Yeah. What is so puzzling to me is that some of the smartest people who are also, you know, some of the analytics people and they're grounded in mathematics, they're grounded in evidence, they're grounded in science, which is why they've always rejected team chemistry, because they don't see any of that involved in team chemistry, that when you present them with the science, which I spent 10 years researching, and it's irrefutable, and it does explain team chemistry, they don't even want to look at it. And what's super puzzling to me is that these are the same people who didn't get like why so many people rejected analytics for so long. And and a lot of baseball people and sports people, but especially baseball people, rejected analytics for so long because they didn't understand it. And I think it's the same thing that's happening with the analytics people who are dismissing team chemistry. They don't understand it.
Well, in fairness to the analytics people, you can show your work with analytics, whereas in a lot of ways, everything about intangibles is in the word. You can't touch it, you can't manipulate it. It's sort of a you had to be there kind of thing. And you have to be able to talk to people about that. And the only way to do that is with access. And a lot of analytics people can't get that level of access. So, I mean, and when you add to that the fact that athletes and people in sports are more adept at message making than sort of reporters and people like us are to figure out what how to sift through the message making. They know how to present themselves. So analytics people, I think, don't tend to trust that level of the message. You have to sort of get inside, talk to people in the game, get them to know what you're about, and then maybe they push the curtain back some. There's a high level of that's none of your business, or that's stuff that only people inside the circle can know. And the more people you exclude from that process, the harder it is to make the case that there's more than math to baseball, and or more than math to anything. I mean, there is chemistry. There are intangibles that the interactions of personalities sort of dictate that you're not going to see on Baseball Reference. I mean, Baseball Reference is a fabulous site. It gives you billions of numbers. But if you're looking for the reasons why those numbers come to fruition, sometimes the answer is analytics, sometimes it's those intangibles. And since you can't see them and you have to trust the people who explain them to you, I think it gets hard for a lot of people who are steeped in analytics to trust what they're hearing, because they are more comfortable trusting what they see on hard copy.
Right. And there's a lot of evidence that's based in math, and the math evidence is the easiest to comprehend, because you calculate all these things and it comes to a black and white, this is what it is. Now, do we have to interpret analytics? Yes. But it's a hugely valuable tool, but it's a tool. But what took me, a frickin' 10 years to do this book was researching all the science of it. And to study team chemistry basically is to study human beings, because everything that happens in a locker room and in a clubhouse is happening in our lives, right? I mean, we profoundly affect one another. So we affect moods and mindsets, but we also affect each other's heart rates and metabolism. So what I came out with at the end of this book was that team chemistry is actually a biological construct with a single function, and its function is to elevate performance, because why even talk about team chemistry if it doesn't elevate performance? So like this, once you read the science of it, and as I did, talk to evolutionary biologists and neuroscientists and organizational psychologists, plus all the people who have actually experienced And that's the other thing. I love that people dismiss the firsthand experience that is lived by the athletes and coaches and the people actually in the industry, that maybe we should give them a little bit more credence, but if you look at the science, there is no way you can come out the other side without acknowledging that it exists. And it's not I believe it or I don't believe it. It's like evolution. Do I believe in evolution? No, you either acknowledge it exists or you don't acknowledge it exists. And frankly, that's what team chemistry is now. You either acknowledge it or you don't.
Well, Billy Beane, who, is famously remembered for dismissing chemistry as a factor in building a team, has come around to the notion that, yes, there are things other than the numbers that you need to reference when you build a team. So if he can be converted, anybody should be able to. But one of the intangibles about this debate is that when the analytics people started to make a case for that level of analysis in that way, the people who didn't want to know were aggressive in dismissing them. And when somebody does that, you get defensive about it. And one of the reasons why it's taken this long to at least reach this level of rapprochement is the fact that the reaction to the first wave of analytics was, this is nonsense. I see baseball. I know baseball. I don't need math. And so, it's the intangibles of arguing the tangible. I mean, basically what you get is an Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail. It's, you're not listening to what I'm saying. No, because I think what you're saying is nonsense. Well, then I think what you're saying is nonsense. Debate ends. And I'm not surprised that it's taken this long for at least the smartest people to come off their sort of doctrinaire position on, is it nature, nurture, or math?
Right.
And let's be honest. I mean, whether you're doing math or whether you're doing sort of the nature of baseball and baseball players and baseball executives and all that, you have to be really skilled at understanding the tools you're working with. I mean, there are a lot of people who cite statistics all the time, but can't figure out what they mean because they don't understand not only the breadth and scope of what the numbers can tell you, but their limitations, and vice versa. Right. It's just, there are people who can't figure out how to use numbers because they're not, they have not been raised to view things in a more analytic fashion. So it's largely, the study of people talking past each other, right, rather than people talking with each other. It's the difference between explain VORP to me in a way I can understand, and explain why the catcher not getting along with the pitcher is an issue.
Right.
And, so it's being able to listen as well as yell. And let's face it, the internet has made sure that we're really good at yelling and not very good at listening.
Yeah. But it is the smart people that are, the smartest people and the cutting edge right now. Analytics, every clubhouse, if we're just talking baseball, every front office has the brilliant guys from the Ivy Leagues who are churning out the algorithms and getting that competitive edge has already been won. And it continues. To me, the next competitive edge are the people who can, and I didn't, in my book, my book is not prescriptive. I can't tell you how to do this, but I can tell you what it is and how it's valuable and how it's real, right? So the analytics guys need to understand, or any smart general manager needs to understand, you have to have both. You can't accurately value a player unless you understand both. what he actually produces on the field and how much he lifts the performance. It's like, what would a player be valued at if he raises the performance of 5 other guys, right? And can you quantify it? Absolutely not. You cannot qualify it, but you can see it. I mean, it's the Jonny Gomes, right? Every team he goes on, you know, they win. Now, he could be the Forrest Gump of baseball for sure, but the numbers, this is where numbers come in, say it's way beyond just accident.
But what you need to make that case stick with people in baseball is the control group where it's proven.
Well,
because here's why it matters. As teams have been valued for more money than ever before, and now it's basically a billionaires club, those billionaires live on quarterly reports and balance sheets and hard data. They don't understand, well, I'm doing this by feel.
No,
or I've seen this. Well, let me finish.
I know, but I just don't want you to put out there that it's by feel.
No. What I'm doing, this is how they view it. They want to know with math why something works.
Right.
And it's not, I'm not trying to oversimplify your book. What I'm saying is, the view is, okay, you come in here and told me that Jonny Gomes is important to us, yet I see that he's hitting 238. Prove your work. Right. And because most people who have made that level of money in their life are very much attached to, what do the numbers tell me?
Right.
That's the misconception, and that's why you sort of need this weird control group where a team is better than the sum of its part, better than the measurable sum of its parts, to convince people in baseball at the high level that this works, or you get them to understand that there is math that you can apply to intangibles that they can use, understand, and develop.
I guess my question is, why is math more believable than science? So team chemistry, you can prove team chemistry on so many different levels. One is that you're basically applying science that is already well accepted. And evolutionary biology. So let me tell you that our brains, over 3 million years of evolution, right, kept growing, they quadrupled in size. Now, why did our brains quadruple in size? We think, well, it's
steroids.
It's steroids. Well,
Sorry, I couldn't help myself.
Little did we know. But it did quadruple in size, right? And our human brains, believe it or not, are disproportionately big for the size of our bodies, compared to the rest of, the animal kingdom. And the reason it got so big was not to house our incredible intellect, but was to accommodate all the social wiring. We're the most social animals that the world has ever seen. So we are tribals, we are tribal creatures, and our brains, as I'm looking at you, Ray, I'm picking up, whether I realize it or not, I picked up on that. All the nonverbal language, the stuff that you can't even control from your there are facial muscles none of us can control, but it shows our brains this glimpse of a mood, of a thought. And guess what? My brain supposedly is processing all of that and recalibrating my own mindset, my own mood, and even affects this interaction we're having even remotely on Zoom. It affects heart rate and metabolism and all the rest of it, which is what had to develop because we needed to survive as tribes. Now, that's who we still are. So you have a clubhouse or a locker room full of all these people interacting. They are profoundly influencing one another. Now, Jonny Gomes doesn't have the talent to hit higher than 242, which is his career average. But what his gift was he could get other guys to believe that this was the greatest quest they were ever on. And the evidence, one of the pieces of evidence in the book is the 2013 Boston Red Sox. Did I ever tell you this story?
Yes.
I might have. Okay. So, Jonny Gomes is on the Boston Red Sox, 2013, going into game 4. They're down 2-1 to the Cardinals. The lineup gets posted, and Jonny Gomes is not in the lineup because of pitching matchup. He was he would be playing left field when the right pitching matchup was, and somebody else was playing. Novel was playing left field.
Yeah, it was a platoon.
It was platoon. Thank you. I was too much of this pineapple vodka, which is really good, I got to tell you.
First of all, there's no such thing as too much pineapple vodka, and that can be proven by math.
Or science. I'm going with science here, Ray. So the lineup is posted. Jonny Gomes is not in the lineup, for good reason. He was hitting, probably less than 100 for the postseason and hadn't gotten a hit in the series. But the leadership group in that clubhouse, Big Papi, Dustin Pedroia, John Lester, Jake Peavy, they go into manager John Farrell's office, and they say, we want Gomes in the lineup. And of course, Farrell balks. It's like, it's out. It went out on social media. And I get to choose this, by the way. And they said, no, we believe we are a better team with Jonny Gomes in it. So long story short, he changes the lineup. Suddenly Shane Victorino has lower back tightness. Jonny Gomes goes in the game. They win the game. I mean, by coincidence, he hits a 3-run homer and they win the game. Now, I take this to a neuroscientist at UC San Francisco, and I said, okay, this happened. Tell him the story. Okay, what's the scientific evidence for this? You got to give me something here. And he said, well, did they believe they were going to win? Yeah, they believed they were going to win. And did they win? Yeah, they won. Did they play better when Jonny Gomes was in the lineup? I said, well, they were 10-1 in the postseason when Jonny Gomes was in the lineup. He said, and he's a medical doctor and a neuroscience PhD. And he said, I just don't understand why people don't see their own experience as the evidence. He said that is the evidence. And Jonny Gomes was like a walking placebo. If we believe something enough, our brains actually change. It's like if we take a painkiller, if we take a placebo, but we think it's a painkiller, that part of our brain actually adjusts to, oh, I have a painkiller. The neurons and the nerves are all sending the signals to shut down the pain. So if that's true, then why don't we believe, or at least open our minds to believing that those Red Sox believed so much they were going to be better with Jonny in the lineup that they actually were?
The reason why, in my pinheaded opinion, is because billionaires and the people they hire know what they know. And because they've been successful, they're unlikely, or they're more resistant to things outside their experience. And one of the things that you've just explained is outside their experience, because no teams have neurosurgeons or, psychologists. I mean, they have psychologists for when somebody, ends up drunk in a park half naked at 3 a.m. But they don't really study it to that extent. And if they do, they don't know how to apply it in a way that the general manager and the owner are comfortable understanding and applying.
Right.
So it's like, OPS has always been a valuable tool, only it took 100 years to even use it and another 20 to figure out what its value was and how you use the tool.
Right.
And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's that there are things that that doctor told you that, yeah, there may be ways to measure it, there may not be, but it requires a level of trust that.
I don't buy that. It's not about trust.
No, they have to trust that the information they're getting is
Yeah.
comprehensible to them.
They do.
It's not about the validity of the validity of the information. It's about I have these numbers, I'm comfortable with these numbers. You're bringing me other information and I'm not as comfortable with that. And is it backwards thinking? Yeah, in a lot of ways it absolutely is. But this too is one of those intangibles. If you have open-minded people in charge of your team, those things will be factored in and very possibly factored in intelligently. But if you don't trust the information or don't fully understand it,
yeah,
the impulse is to dismiss it or at least minimize it so that the data you do believe in always wins out in the end.
Right. And this is what is a head scratcher to me, is that the people who are on the front edge of analytics, and, I assume that that's who you're talking about, the general managers who are embracing analytics fully, which absolutely they should. But here's the thing that is just so puzzling to me. So the analytics allows us to arrive at a strategy for a game, a valuation of a player, all of those truly important elements to winning. Like if we can be super accurate about our strategy against opponent X, that is amazing. But guess who has to carry out your brilliant strategy? Actual human beings. So how do we approach making sure as much as we possibly can that this collection of 20 in baseball, 26 human beings are as motivated, prepared, energetic, all of the committed, that they're so committed to this team and to each other as teammates that they are going to execute your strategy at the very highest level. So if you just do the strategy and totally forget that other side of the equation, you are really dropping the ball on a really intellectual level. It's not a feel level, it's an intellectual level.
Well, this is where another intangible comes into play, and it's ego. You have to, first of all, convince an owner that this is an important part of roster construction and money allocation, so that somebody who...
Let me interject one thing. I don't know how much it is about roster construction, because I don't think it's prescriptive. I don't know that you can do a test and you can say, oh, this guy's going to do this. But once they're in that clubhouse, the culture of that clubhouse is huge to get the best out of those players.
Not in dispute, but at a time when managerial choices are being minimized by general managers with the complete, acquiescence of the owner or at the insistence of the owner, what you have to do is reverse this level of distrust in the manager and his ability to sort of feel his clubhouse and see how the chemistry works to a team's advantage without providing the spreadsheet that you might need. You have to be able to let your manager walk into your office and say, this is why we need player X rather than player Y.
Right.
Because very often player X is not compensated to the same level that player Y is. And if player Y is sitting on the bench while player X is playing, the general manager is going to hear from the owner, I'm wasting $12 million to play a guy who's worth $5 million. And
Right.
that is part of the analytics that owners apply. It's,
Right.
and so that's why I say it has to start with an owner who wants his general manager to trust his manager with all things, not only on the field, but in the room.
Right.
And that is becoming less and less valuable to a growing number of business majors who rise to the level of general manager, or in some cases owner.
Right.
And so you have to break that culture in the same way that the anti-analytics culture had to be broken.
Right.
The pendulum has in many ways swung the other way, so that the people best positioned to understand everything you're talking about and apply it in a practical way are being dismissed.
Right.
That's how this happens.
Oh, I know. And I totally understand that. And I feel like, the money is on the line here. The first teams that really embrace the science of team chemistry and go beyond what I've been able to understand and be able to identify, and go beyond that and really say, these are the key players in our clubhouse, and we value those players, even though you look at Baseball Reference and you're like, oh my God, how did that player get to last 12 years in the major leagues? Well, he lasted that way because the players around him got better, and there's all kinds of ways they did get better, and how that player, as I call, a super carrier of chemistry. But I do want to switch to who, the super disruptors of chemistry. So if they're super carriers of chemistry, like a Jonny Gomes or a Mike Krukow back in the day, I always thought, well, there have to be super disruptors. And of course, the top on everybody's list for super disruptors, Barry Bonds. There was no question. I covered him, you covered him. I thought he was a complete jerk. It was him and Reggie Jackson. I just thought, oh God, I'm so glad I'm a columnist, because I don't have to talk to him if he does something good in a game. And so I, didn't talk to Barry Bonds unless I had to. Never talked to Reggie Jackson unless I had to. And yet, when I go in to think my chapter on super carriers is Jonny Gomes, my chapter on super disruptors is Barry Bonds. Can't get Barry Bonds, he's not going to talk to me, blah, 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 blah. Talk to all his teammates, only to discover he wasn't a cancer in that clubhouse at all, except for the last 3 years of his career. He may not have been a cancer, but he certainly didn't help anybody. And that he wasn't a cancer for all kinds of counterintuitive reasons. But I know what was your experience, and are you surprised to hear he wasn't a cancer? And there was an analytics, there was this group of guys who were analytics guys who did say, oh, he is not a cancer because he contributed so much to the team that he didn't undermine the team.
Because the people who decide who's a cancer are very often people in our business.
Always.
And we're not good judges of character in general. I mean, we could tell somebody who's overtly nice or overtly hateful, but we fancy ourselves, studiers of the human soul, and we suck at that. It's, well, he didn't talk to me today. He didn't make my job easier. Therefore, he's a jackwagon, and I must condemn him. When in fact, and Bonds better than I do, there was always a thing about, he's a pain in the ass to deal with, but man, he sure makes us money. And that's not a disruptor.
He gives us a lot of wins.
and right. And the other thing about baseball players is that in a lot of ways they are incredibly pragmatic. Because, they'll put up with somebody who's an irritant if the irritant gets them from 85 wins to 93, and
Absolutely.
whether you can measure it or not doesn't matter, they believe it and they perform accordingly. But that's part of the alchemy of baseball that a generation of decision makers has come to disrupt, because those measurements are so not inaccurate, but hard to quantify. And the inability to quantify them, or the limits in quantifying them, make judgments that lead you down bad roads. It's like the argument about the quarterback who needs to be well-spoken and handle himself well in press conferences, when in fact, no. I mean,
Right.
it doesn't, all that stuff doesn't matter
Right.
in terms of, are you getting the maximum amount of benefit from this person's talent and personality?
Right.
And because there's a sliding scale to every player, it takes an extraordinary level of sort of observation to make those puzzles work. And you
Right.
can only do that by being the guy in the manager's office who sees it all the time. And even then, there are a lot of managers who don't see it,
Right.
because the manager who's in the clubhouse all the time becomes, in his own way, a disruptor.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, so who's the person in charge of deciding who's a disruptor and who isn't? Results. You know, Bonds is without question a pain in the ass, but so is Jeff Kent. But somehow,
Both of those on the same team, you would think that team would just, you know, crack wide open.
yeah,
And yet they made each other better. Bonds will never admit that Jeff Kent made him better, but he did. And the reason we know he did is that year that Jeff Kent won the MVP and Bonds finished second. And Bonds hadn't had an MVP in like 6 years, but he had won like, I don't know, 3 in a row with the Pirates.
mhm.
And the year after Jeff Kent won the MVP, I think Bonds won it the next 3 or 4 years in a row. So
Okay.
you can't tell me Jeff Kent didn't make him better.
Well, except that, you know, MVP votes are not analytics either. But what it is, it's an acknowledgement that rather than be planets in opposition to each other, they orbited each other in a way that could not be foreseen, in a way that could not be sort of regulated or manipulated. It
Wow.
just happened because it happened. And it is to the Giants' credit that they had a manager at the time who could spot the difference between, God, I don't want to talk to that guy today, and God, I got to get him in the lineup, and right in the heart of it.
Exactly. Yeah, obviously Dusty Baker. And that's what we talk about, the question I always get is, about team chemistry is, well, what about those 70s A's and those 70s Yankees, and why didn't they need team chemistry? And it's the same relationship with Bonds and Kent, meaning there's task chemistry. Nobody had better task chemistry than Bonds and Kent. When I talked to him for this book, and there's a whole chapter on the curious case of Barry Bonds, because he totally flipped my assumption about him being the super disruptor. And they, as we know, Ray, being in the Bay Area, the cameras were on when they had their actual fist fight in the dugout that day. And I don't remember what year it was, but who was the guy in the dugout who, when, and I can't remember if it was Bonds or Kent, hit a home run the next inning, they're congratulating him. And if you talk to Bonds, he says, there is no teammate I'd rather have than Jeff Kent playing there at second base. And Kent said the same thing about Bonds. And so what I call that is task chemistry. They had incredible task chemistry, because the underlying foundation of chemistry is trust. So in the clubhouse, it's, all that trust. I trust you guy, I trust the messenger who's giving me this advice. On the field, it's also about trust. Bonds trusted that Kent cared as much about winning as he did, and Kent felt the same way about Bonds. And the same thing with those 70s A's and 70s Giants. Couldn't stand each other. It's, it's the 25 Cavs, 25 players. But they never doubted that the guys they were playing with cared as much about their craft and winning as they did. So they did have chemistry.
Well, yeah, but see, we don't know what chemistry means because we apply our own definitions to it.
Well,
and when you say task chemistry, when you say task chemistry, that's a specific term that you can use to say, look, they didn't go out to dinner together. They didn't sit next to each other in the clubhouse, but they both knew that the other was an accomplished baseball player who could make him better, and vice versa. Yeah. That's what I mean. Because when you hear chemistry, it's a pretty amorphous word unless you speak specifically about what you mean.
Right.
And task chemistry is the kind of term that ought to be used, because the A's, who allegedly couldn't get along together, were defined in large part by a fist fight between Raleigh Fingers and John Odom. And then it was, Cliff Johnson and somebody else. They fought, but they could compartmentalize whatever they thought about each other when they went out to perform the task of the day, which was to play the game. So it's partially about how we apply the definition of chemistry, because chemistry, it's hard to have bad chemistry and win unless you define chemistry as, well, they didn't go out to dinner together every night.
Right.
And that's why I had to go on that soliloquy, because I'm not arguing with your definition. That the word chemistry means too many things to too many people and doesn't get explained.
Right. And that's what the book is about, is defining team chemistry for what it actually is and not what people think it is. Because it's not camaraderie. It's not cohesion. Camaraderie and cohesion are kind of a state of being. Chemistry only exists. You can't say a team has chemistry. And of course, there's, layers below this that are in the book. I don't need to articulate here. Chemistry is active. Those other two things are, fellowship and cohesion are static. Chemistry is active. You can't say a team has chemistry unless they have elevated their performance. They have increased their productivity. Same in a business. You don't have chemistry in your office unless productivity goes up. So that's what you have to measure. And now it doesn't mean you're going to win. It just means your performance as a team was elevated. Maybe the next year you're going to win, but your statistics go up. You've won more games than you had before. That's what team chemistry is. And team chemistry is also, I think, if you're going to observe team chemistry, and you can't calculate the science or the mathematics of it, if you have what the Warriors call a just us team, that you get to the point which the military works very hard to get every battle company to, that your purpose is not some lofty goal. It's not even like, okay, let's change history in San Francisco, when the Giants won the 2010 World Series. The purpose is your teammates. You are fighting for your teammates. Until you get to that point, you're not necessarily a good chemistry team, because that has to be the motivation, because that's the only thing that can sustain you day in and day out. That lofty goal of the World Series at the end of October, that's not going to sustain you. But if you have those connections to your teammates, that trust, that caring, that sense of purpose, your purpose becomes playing for each other. And I just want to add the one coda at this, is that Jake Peavy, who played for the Giants, but was, you know, a Cy Young winner and was with the Boston and everyone else. He capsulized this for me better than anybody. Because I was talking about team chemistry has to affect performance, blah, blah, blah. And I said, you know, Jake, why would team chemistry matter to you at all? You know, he's that stomper and that snorter and the guy that's like, you know, he gets himself up for the game and he's giving 100%. But I said, you're already giving 100%. Why does team chemistry matter to you at all? And he said, my teammates bring out a fight in me I can't willingly summon for myself. And that is a total human evolution, well-documented phenomenon.
Okay. Well, let me play not devil's advocate, because I'm not disputing your theory, but there are any number of different pulls on a player. A player like Jake Peavy has made his money in the game. He's no longer fighting for that first big paycheck. And if you're 22 and you just got called up and you're working on a rookie contract and you have aspirations, that becomes a motivation either
Absolutely.
in bonus of or in opposition to worrying about how you affect other people.
Agreed.
And that's why the idea of task chemistry is important as opposed to mere chemistry, because it's human beings. The 22-year-old who wants to become the 27-year-old multimillionaire is going to, by definition, worry about hitting 320 as opposed to 280.
Totally.
And forget the fact that there are tasks that need to be performed for those around you. Jake Peavy, when you talk to him, I'm sure that he had already reached that level and understood that the next level is, how do I become the best player I can be, so that in the most crass way, I might get one more decent contract because my teammates are helping me and I'm helping them because they're helping me. So there's lots of dynamics that are involved, not just that task chemistry thing. And because you're dealing with humans with different motivations, that's the trick.
Yeah. You know, the military has done more studies on this, like on the cause and effect of bonding to performance. And what they've known and what they've learned over hundreds and hundreds of years of armies is that to get, and it's obviously been mostly men, to get men to run into battle under the most unbearable stress requires them to be motivated by the guys next to them. Guess what? Those guys aren't going in for God and country. They're going in because they can't abandon the guy next to them. Now, you apply, so that is a human tribal response to tribalism, right? And that's what teams are. So if you can create a culture in which you become a just us team and you start playing for your teammates, and we see every single team that wins the World Series, they have team chemistry, you know, and they got beards and they got their handshakes. And so, you know, it's easy to dismiss them because it's not about the beards and it's not about the handshakes. Those are the evidence of the chemistry that has already come to life in that clubhouse among that team, that they feel a just us team is, I want to be with these guys in this time on this exact quest, and these are the only guys I want to be with. And that's what happens on a great chemistry team. And the science of what happens biologically to you, which is not interesting in this conversation, but you can find it all in Intangibles, of why it's supported by science over so many years of human interaction.
Well, And all of that is true, but the thing that works against that is the fact that athletes are rewarded not for their abilities to perform task chemistry, but for their raw statistical numbers. And if you're playing to make $10 million a year as opposed to $4 million a year, that can be, it isn't always, but it can be an obstacle to the task chemistry you're talking about. And that's why the trick to chemistry is convincing everybody that if we all are in this for each other, everybody gets rewarded. And the experience so far in way too many cases is that some guys get rewarded and some guys don't. And because of that, it's hard to convince people in the industry that task chemistry, A, is not only measurable, but useful to measure, but B, that players can be motivated by it when the evidence of their paycheck suggests otherwise. And that's the hardest trick of all to pull off.
Well, the hard trick is to get anybody, and I talk about this in the book, study after study after study in businesses, what motivates higher productivity among your workforce. It is never money. Never, never, never. Individually, obviously, there are people who say, I'm not going to work unless you're going to pay me more. But for most people, because of the way our brains are wired as social, tribal human beings, it's about doing this thing together. It's about being part of a team. And when general managers and managers understand that, and many do. Many already do this. They just don't know the science, like, why is it working? Why what you're doing is actually working is because the science totally supports you. It explains it. But it isn't generally that outside thing, that outside, I'm going to get, $1 million more. At our core, we want to be part of something extraordinary. We do. We absolutely do. And having that, extra $1 million important to some people, but most people, that exhilaration of being part of a driven, focused team is what, with these exact guys, is what every single guy misses the most. I mean, that is what motivates you.
And all that's true, but two things have to be included here in trying to understand how task chemistry is or is not rewarded. Players surrounded by their agents and families and hangers-on keep score by their paychecks, which means that that's a barrier they have to overcome. And the other barrier they have to overcome is that is very often how an owner and a general manager view it as well. You're more valuable to me because my judgment is that you're worth $10 million. Whereas the $4 million guy that I tend to ignore, and I just threw him that because it's a standard contract, is more valuable because he can create more things within a clubhouse that make a collective work.
Right.
The idea of contracts is a very individual thing. The idea of task chemistry is a very collective thing. Mm-hmm. And they butt heads because
right.
They do.
Right.
So until you can merge those two
right.
seemingly competing forces, it's going to be hard to get people to A, comprehend what chemistry actually is, right. B, find the people who are best for it, and C, apply it on a regular basis to enhance your chances of success.
Right. It's the synthesizers are the ones that are going to rise to the top. So because so many people in sports don't understand it, that's why they have this book. It's like a manual that they can use to improve their team and understand the science of it, or somebody can hand it to them. So
and save their jobs.
And what?
And save their jobs.
And save their jobs, because somebody is gonna, get a hold of how this actually works and then they're going to be on the front edge of the have the competitive advantage. So Ray, how much of your wine did you drink? Let's see.
I had a thick pour, so.
Yeah, I'm down to my ice cube. So I think we both need to go back and refill our drinks and have some dinner. And I thank you, Ray, for raising every possible, which I knew you would. You're such a contrarian. Raise every possible objection. This is not your normal interview to puff somebody's book, but I loved it because I got to have my say.
Well, but you know, it's not about being a contrarian. It's about simply seeing the reasons why a perfectly reasonable theory gets so much resistance.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I didn't disagree with you. All I said was this is why people don't get this.
I know. And I like that because it allowed me to give me my argument for that. So Ray, cheers. Thank you. Hi to Beth.
Regards to Barry, who was loitering around cooking things.
I know. I saw him walking in the back. He's like,
Sorry
okay.
about that, Ray.
I know. He's
Hey,
always
Barry,
cooking.
next time, maybe some pants?
This is my big chance.
I wouldn't describe that as a big chance.
Oh, and what do you know?
Yeah, I went there.
I'm ending the meeting on that note. Thanks, Ray.
All right. Take care, Joni.
Bye.
Bye.